wedding rehearsal, the groom approached the priest and said, "Look, Father, I'll give you $100 if you change the vows when it comes to my part. Leave out that section about love, honor, and obey, and being faithful." And he gave the priest the money and he walked away. The next day during the wedding, the priest turned to the man and looked him in the face and said, "Will you promise to prostrate yourself before her, obey her every command, and never look at another woman as long as you live?" The groom looked around and finally said, "Yep, I do." After the ceremony, he jumped the priest and said, "I thought we had a deal." And the priest said, "Your father-in-law made me a better offer." Now, over the years, I performed numerous weddings. And I could tell you a few stories, but they're not as good as that one. But in the Bible, we have this story here in John's Gospel. And weddings were much different than we experience in our lives today. One of the things that's quite different is in the biblical times, the groom's family paid for everything. And the weddings began on Tuesday evening and they lasted for 7 days. Now, if you remember the story at the end of Matthew's Gospel about the story said virgins, bridesmaids, they're waiting for the groom to meet the bride. The father and the bride's father would talk to the groom's father, how much am I going to have to pay you to take her off my hands, the dowry and all that sort of thing. And then they'd all traipse over at night over to the bride's house to pick her up. Well, you have these 10 bridesmaids waiting with their oil. And the story is 5 were ready because they had picked up oil at the BOGO sale at Dollar General, and the other 5 ran out. And so the groom shows up and everybody's happy, we're going to go back to the house, we're going to get married, we're going to have fun, we're going to eat and drink until we get sick and all that. And then the other 5 were sitting there, and the point is you better be ready when God shows up. In this story, we have Jesus and Mary and the disciples arriving at the wedding, and they've already at this point, so it's not the day night or whatever, they've already run out of wine. And probably the world-famous cheese ball with pepperoni and pepper. But at this point, the wine is the most important thing because it is a symbol of joy and celebration. So Mary turns to Jesus and says, "Hey, they've run out of wine already. If you don't do something, the family is going to be embarrassed from the year on." Now, there's also something that goes with this story as well, because there's a financial element here. Now, since it was such a small village, everybody would be there to celebrate the wedding. And poor guests were not expected to give any gifts, but they are also not expected to be first at the buffet table. The rabbi was not expected to give a gift because he was the rabbi. But he was also the first one in line. He would get fed before the groom and the bride. The B-list guests were those that were supposed to help a little. People that might know a little, you might see them down the street or whatever. But the burden for feeding people for 7 days was on the relatives. And they were expected to do well, to share, to help out as much as possible. And if they didn't, the groom's family could bring them to court for being cheap and being deadbeats. So we're talking about, if you run out of stuff, we're talking about major financial problems here for this family. And they haven't even left for the honeymoon yet. And so we have a situation here that could end up to being a disaster financially and family-wise as well. So what we have here is Mary talking to Jesus in front of his disciples. And the Greek is very clear, but not as much in English. It's implied that she wants him to do it now. No ifs, ands, or buts. Your mama is a-talking to you. And the response to Jesus, it does seem abrupt and not very Jesus-mental, gentle, meek, and mild. And it is. In Aramaic, it's even worse. Yes, mother. And we figure, what's going on here? And we wonder. And we get the impression Jesus isn't interested. This isn't what I was going to do. I had something, I was not going to reveal who I am in front of this crowd that's half looped to begin with. And here you want me to do is produce more wine. But because there is a gap that in the story, because Mary gives more orders to the servants, we can assume that there's a little more dialogue that Johnny did not record. And we have to remember that at the time, John is trying to make Mary look like this perfect mother for Mother's Day. And so we don't have all the stuff that went back and forth between the two. There's also been some attempts to get around the word, the use of wine. No, our Jesus is a God-fearing man. He wouldn't drink wine. No, no, no. He would not succumb to booze. But in reality, he did drink wine. That's all they had. Because of the heat and the situation, there could be no unfermented grape juice. And it wasn't until the 1900s that Mr. Welch, whom we know going to grocery stores, came up with the idea of unfermented grape juice for the Methodist Church. And so grape juice was available for the Lord's Supper. And some people drink wine, and some people drink grape juice, and that is a good thing. The wedding took place in Cana, some 5 miles from Nazareth. And this was the home of Nathanael, so people were familiar with each other. 5 miles may seem like a lot to us, but walking was nothing to them at all, so they knew everybody. If Mary was concerned about the wine, she must have been a close relative. Or she must have been a good friend because she would have been concerned about her family. Dan Brown is a very wealthy man because he kind of implied that it was Jesus' wedding. But we don't think that actually occurred, but Dan still has a pretty decent bank account. Now, after the unrecorded conversation, Jesus had the servants fill the 6 water jars with clean water. Now, at the entrance of this banquet hall, wherever they were meeting, there would have been these large, huge water jars where people would have washed their feet and their hands. This was the custom, walking through all the mud, the dust, the dirt, and you had to be clean if you were going to eat. So fortunately for the wedding guests, he didn't change the dirty water into wine. It was all clean water. And so they ended up with an estimate of probably 900 more bottles of wine. The wedding coordinator, the master of the banquet, whatever you want to call them, is impressed. And he says to the bridegroom, "You're now serving better wine." It's not quality of wine, it's that there is more alcohol in this wine. Because the custom was you get drunk, and by the end of the few days there, you don't know what you're drinking, and you really don't care. But all of a sudden, in the middle of the wedding, the 3rd day, remember 3, we like 3, is that it has more content. You're going to get a bigger buzz. The party's going to climb to a new level. Woo-woo, we're going to have fun. Now, as John records, this is the first of Jesus' 7 miracles, and everybody is great. Jesus began his ministry with this kind of unspectacular type of miracle. looks at jugs of water and they turn into wine. No lightning, no young child able now to walk, just water into wine. But it was an announcement that the Messiah had arrived. That life was now going to be different. He has helped out a family because he knew the social implications of running out of wine and of winning. It's a little on the boring side. The story ends. There's not too much razzmatazz to the story. But what motivates here, this miracle, is that Jesus cares. It's something as simple as a family at a wedding. Philip Yancey, in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, kind of adds a little more to it. And he talks about these ceremonial water jars where people wash their hands and wash their feet. And this old water, the old ways, the old covenant is pushed out, dropped out, pushed away. And then this new water occurs when Jesus comes into the world. And now there is a new understanding of who God is and God's generosity. It's a sign of what is going to happen when we allow God into our lives. And so this morning we're sitting here quietly in this sanctuary, and we don't have to understand everything that is going to happen, or what is happening, an understanding of what the scripture lesson might say, or what somebody might say, or even we don't even know what our future is going to be. Especially considering we're going through the pandemic. What new orders might come out? How many of our friends might become sick? But we believe that God is still with us. And He comes to us in different ways. And miracles are going to happen. I think all of us are old enough to remember the show, Kids Say the Darndest Things, and they had that one with Art Linkletter. Children were much more innocent then. And Art's going around asking questions, hoping that the child is going to embarrass his parents. And he asked the little girl, "What's your favorite Bible story?" And she said she liked the one about Jesus turning the water into wine. And he asked her why, and she answered, "If you run out of wine, start praying to Jesus." Mark Twain, the comedian, author, remarked how now he knows why Jesus was invited to so many parties. But we have a very small town wedding. John is using this image of weddings that he borrowed from Isaiah. That there is a covenant, as there is between a couple, of a relationship, of building, of promises, of hopes, of dreams, of the acceptance that there might be occasional problems. But God has offered us who His God is, and He wants us to be His people. And that image is there in the book of Isaiah. And it's also in the image of the church and God in the book of Revelation. There is now a new relationship between God and His people, and it's symbolized in this new wedding. Jesus is beginning His ministry, and John wants us to tell us that God is among us. He didn't have much of a Christmas story, but this is one way of popping out. This guy is different. That God has finally come among us, and life is going to be different. Fred Craddock, who I've talked about before, was a preacher of a church before he became a seminary professor. And like all preachers, he had to write a sermon every week. and he tried to condense his sermon into one sentence. And so with a little help from Fred Craddock and a few others, I came up with, this Jesus is something. This Jesus is something. This Jesus is something. Jesus Christ is the one who can change lives. There's a poem that I enjoy a great deal, The Touch of the Master's Hand, and maybe some of you have heard of it. 'Twas battered and scarred, and the auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste so much time on the old violin. But he held it up with a smile. "What am I bid, good folks?" he cried. "Who will start the bidding for me? $1? $1, then 2, only 2? And $2, who will now make it 3? Going for 3, but no." An old man, a gray-haired man, came back from the back of the room, came forward and picked up the bowl. Then wiping the dust off the old violin and tightening the loose strings, he played a melody pure and sweet as the angel sings. The music ceased, and the auctioneer, with a voice so quiet and low, "Now what am I bid?" as he held up the bow. $1,000? Who will make it 2? 2,000, and who will make it 3? 3,000 once, 3,000 twice, and going, gone. The people cheered, but some cried. "We do not quite understand what changed its worth." Swift came the reply, "The touch of the Master's hand." In this reading there, Jesus has gone to Cana and was in presence at a wedding and performed a miracle. Quite ordinary, but he turned that wedding and those who knew into something extraordinary. And the same is for each one of us, that Jesus Christ can take each one of us, ordinary people, flawed, like that old violin, and with the touch of the Master's hand can make us extraordinary. Not perfect, not insulated from any problems or whatever else is going on, but a people whose lives are now different. The old children's song, "Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so." As the master of the banquet said, everyone serves the cheap wine near the end. But God has done something better and later and never leaves. The disciples learned. Hopefully, we can learn as well.